You're listening to Vet Synapse, a podcast connecting the world of research, innovation, and practical help to the veterinary profession. I'm your host, Dr. Philip Judge from Vet Education. Let's get connected with Vet Synapse. Welcome everyone to another episode of Vet Synapse, and I'm so happy to welcome today Mitch Sigley, who is the CEO and founder of a company called Vet Notes. Mitch, thanks so much for coming along and chatting with us today. I'm very excited to learn a little bit more about what you've been up to and about how AI can help us in veterinary practices, in many, many different spheres. But I'm wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, what got you into this AI space and the veterinary field in particular.
Thanks for having me, Phil. It's really great to be here. The story of Vet Notes actually begins when I was a kid because my parents, Doctors Alison and Glenn, they owned an independent practice on the central coast of New South Wales. So I literally grew up in that practice, going there after school, or a sick day wasn't really at home. It was, it was in the practice, in the kennel room sometimes. And phrases that really stick in my mind growing up is, I've just got to go back in and finish writing up tomorrow on Saturday, or it's been such a long day, got to 6 p.m. and then I had to write up all my cases. And as a kid, I to be honest, I thought nothing of those phrases. That was just, what mum and dad said after work. But a couple of years ago, when I was just getting into sort of artificial intelligence and programming, I realized that there was such an immense opportunity to automate a lot of this clinical documentation. So that's where Vet Notes really started. It was, it was built to help mum and dad get home sooner. And that was about 2 or 3 years ago now. And we've really seen such strong growth in AI and just in general society, but also in veterinary medicine in those couple of years.
Absolutely. I love that story. I think that's awesome. Is get mum and dad home a little bit sooner and they'll be less stressed at the end of the day, less burnt out at the end of the week, and those kinds of things too. I want to zoom out a little bit now and get your perspective on how you see AI as impacting the daily practice life of veterinary medicine compared to what it was maybe like 10 years ago, where AI was very much in its developmental and infancy stage. And now everything has got AI embedded. You can't open a program on your computer without there being an AI assistant there somewhere. So how do you see this playing out in its current form in veterinary practices?
Well, I think what we've just opened up, the can of worms that we've just opened up in veterinary technology, is akin to the transition from paper-based record keeping. So, writing out your clinical notes. We transitioned to writing and typing into a practice management system, for many practices, probably somewhere in the early 2000s. I think we have just entered the next transition, which is into the AI phase, where, at the moment we're seeing AI in radiology, in dental, and some scribing and applications that write text for us. So we're actually really just at the beginning of what is really the next big shift, I would say.
Great. Yeah. I mean, I have an ultrasound machine that uses AI to enhance the images that I'm getting from my patients as well, which is really cool. And it's live over the air. As I submit an image, it uses AI from thousands and thousands of other images to be able to more accurately represent what I'm seeing. So it's a fascinating sphere. And you're right. I think it is. We really are just at the beginning of this. Now, let's say somebody is in practice, they start to use AI. Let's take a note-taking software to begin with, like Vet Notes. What's the time saving that a typical vet, in your experience, can achieve with something like an AI note taker?
Well, the most effective users of Vet Notes can easily save north of an hour every single day. And the breakdown of that is actually relatively simple. If you can imagine saving 5 or 10 minutes on note taking for every consult that you do, for many vets, there's 2 or 3 hours in time savings there. But, on average across the day with varied case difficulties and various note taking requirements, an hour is a really achievable figure for 95% of vets.
Yeah, I'm thinking to my own life as an emergency vet. A lot of our cases are really intense. They oftentimes go through several treatment revisions in a 12-hour shift, and those all need to be documented and recorded. And I could easily spend well in excess of 15, 20 minutes typing up a record for one case sometimes. So yeah, if you multiply that by 15 or 16 cases in a hospital where I work, yeah, that's a huge saving of time potentially.
Yeah, spot on.
I know this gets asked a fair bit, but if you're using an AI note taker, clearly this information goes up to the cloud somewhere. And then it's transmitted into, or the use AI modifies or essentially interprets your conversation and then spits that out as a medical record. So, are there any legal considerations for AI generated note taking versus myself if I'm manually writing those notes? What is more accurate? What is, yeah, are there any negatives to the use of AI in this situation when it comes to, I guess, the accuracy of a medical record? Is it better to use AI than my own brain? What's the information you can give us there?
Well, there's a couple of things to unpack there. So, firstly, on the legalities of recording conversations and generating AI notes, there's probably more things to consider when we're talking about recording people's voices. So, to record someone's voice, the rules around that really vary by jurisdiction. If we're talking about in New South Wales, for instance, you need to get people's permission to record their voice. That's at a state level, but also at a veterinary level, the Veterinary Practitioners Board of New South Wales also mandates that vets using AI scribes need to get permission from the clients. So it varies by jurisdiction and country and state. And that's on the recording side. And then on the note generation side, honestly, there's nothing that would massively surprise you regarding the legalities of those notes. Most importantly, the vet is still in charge of verifying that they're accurate. And they do need to do that because not only are they accountable for the notes, it is also possible anybody that's used any form of AI knows that things can get in that have been misinterpreted or may not be exactly correct. So validating that everything is factual and accurate is absolutely essential.
Great. So in your practice management system, we really should have a checkbox or something like that to say notes verified by the veterinarian at the bottom to be sure that that's something that's not missed or overlooked as far as that's concerned.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And look, any good AI scribing software will have small features to boost compliance to things like what you've just said. So, for example, whenever VetNote sends a note to a practice management system, it will always put in a line that says checked equals no, so that when you're reviewing notes, you can take that line out or change it to yes. So that in every single note, it's in there, whether it's been checked or not. So you've got visibility and accountability around exactly that.
Great. So you have to manually go in there and change that no to a yes so that it's verified. That's awesome because I think yeah, that is always something I think that people get a little worried about, particularly, vet board complaints and those sorts of things. So I think it's a really important aspect of knowing what is required and the fact that these notes are still, in order for them to be signed off, they have to be signed off by the veterinarian in charge of the case so that they are a true and accurate medical record.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And just to unpack the sort of the second part of the question there, what are the advantages of AI notes or my own notes, or which is more accurate? I would frame this question or the discussion here around in the real world, like what's actually going to happen. We know that so many vets are booked back to back and really don't get a chance to write notes throughout the day, or their notes throughout the day are one line in the PMS that says left ear. And then, you look at the invoice to reconstruct what happened hours before. So generally, AI notes are going to be fantastic in the instance that you didn't get a chance to write notes during the consult. However, if were you to write those notes out yourself manually, is that going to compare to the AI scribe? Probably not. Like writing them yourself is always going to be more accurate, but using the AI notes as a draft and then making any tweaks that you need to is a really, really good middle ground in terms of time it takes for the busy vet and also accuracy as the ultimate output.
Yeah, and I could see that accuracy could potentially improve with the use of an AI recorder in cases in which you are verbalizing your physical examination findings. Because I'm just imagining seeing 15 animals in a day or 25 animals in a day and verbalizing this abdomen feels nice and soft and comfortable or whatever. And I may not remember that 2 or 3 hours later. I may have made a couple of scribbles on a bit of paper, but if I'm verbalizing that in the consult room, the note taker is going to be able to pick that up and reflect that in the record. Would that be right?
Yeah, that's spot on. There's sort of two domains here that we think about. The first is precision. So
Mm.
AI scribes are going to help the precision of your notes because, like you've said, when you're verbalizing things, it's going to note it down exactly for you. For example, the heart rate is 140. Like you know that is going to be recorded in your notes. So later you have that exact figure. The second axis or domain that we think about is comprehensiveness. And AI scribes can boost the comprehensiveness of your notes because it's going to include extra things that you said or the client said that you may not have recalled. They were perhaps like a supplementary detail or slightly less relevant, but still, should be in your notes. So, for instance, dog comes in for its ear during the exam. You notice, it needs a dental, so you might mention that, and then you go on to treat the ear, and then you write your notes up about the ear case. AI scribes in this instance can help you remember, oh, actually, there's some dental observations here that I'll note down.
Great. And I would imagine, some owners, when you're talking to them, they give a very full history, sometimes talking about Great Uncle Bulgaria, who may not live with the dog, and many other things as well. But there are also some secondary details about their animal that we may not necessarily write down as a veterinarian in a consult because it's deemed that it may not be directly related to the primary complaint that's the patient has come in with. So I guess keeping track of all of those secondary things can also improve the accuracy of the record and potentially be valuable for follow-up as well.
Yeah, exactly that. We often have vets tell us that vet notes helps them record these extra details, which are useful in follow-ups and just useful in providing a really great level of customer service and sort of familiarity with the client.
Yeah, that's great. What about data security? Is there any, I guess there are quite a few AI companies out there offering transcription of consultations. What do you look for, or what should a veterinarian look for in terms of the sort of company? Now, I know that obviously you're the CEO of VetNotes, but what should we look for in terms of the sort of company, their data security? How do we know that the data that's in the cloud is going to remain confidential only to you and your practice management system that it eventually sends them to? Are there any safeguards people should watch out for?
Yeah, look. Firstly, to frame the discussion about security, the way that we think about it here at VetNotes is that when you're looking at any piece of software, if there's one thing that it had to have, it would be security. It'd have to keep your data safe because if it had nothing else, or if it had everything else, it wouldn't matter if it wasn't secure. It could be incredibly accurate. It could be really cheap. It could be beautiful and really easy to use. But literally none of that matters if it's not secure. So, in terms of what you should look for in terms of data security, being compliant, if you're an Australian clinic, being compliant with the Australian privacy principles or the Australian Privacy Act, that's of course table stakes. Generally, it's best if you can have the data stored in your region. So, for Australians here in Australia, if you're in the UK or the US or New Zealand, being able to select that I'd like my data stored in my own country
Mhm.
is really important. And any trustworthy company is going to have quite extensive documentation publicly available on their website. In terms of AI scribes, for the most part, there's actually nothing new in terms of what is good security. Good data security that software companies have done for decades still applies now in terms of encryption, in terms of access control. Probably the new things that we would recommend people to look out for are particularly around how your data is being used. So when your data goes off to your AI scribing company, are they keeping that within your account? Are they selling that to a third party? Are they using that to train even better AI models? How that's being used is actually really important and does vary a little bit by vendor. And of course, the best case scenario and is that it's not being sold to anyone. It's not being used to train external models. It's only used to generate your notes, and then it's stored for your own record keeping, or even better, it's automatically deleted.
Great. Thanks for that answer there. That's really helpful. I want to focus a little bit more on Vet Notes now. I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about Vet Notes, how it works, how it interprets, and how it integrates with practice management systems.
Sure. So conceptually, how to think about vet notes, or to be honest, any AI scribe, is that it's going to take in audio, it's going to write something useful for you, and then it's going to transfer and send that to your practice management system. Now, the most common way that this happens in clinics today is you record a consultation. Vet Notes will write down what happened in the conversation, and then it'll draft a clinical note, and then it will automatically sync that over to your practice management system. So, in a practical sense, it's like having somebody sit in the room and just draft notes for you, so that at the end of the consult or at the end of the day, you just go through and review the draft. Now, this process of audio in clinical notes to practice management software, it can vary a little bit. For example, large animal vets might, instead of recording a whole consultation, they might just record a dictation at the end of, seeing a client. So they'll do a recording out on the farm, and then that will get just generated into their clinical notes and sent to their practice management system. And in terms of step 2, clinical notes aren't the only thing that you can generate with an AI scribe. So the second most common use case that we see is called the client summary. That's where we record the consult, we generate your clinical notes, but it'll also generate a summary for your client. So it'll be in really easy to understand language, and it'll say, thanks for coming in. Here's what we found. Here's what we did. And here's what you need to do. So we find that these are really useful for your more complex cases where there's just a couple of things going on. Perhaps there's multiple sets of treatment instructions. Also really useful for senior citizen owners, and also really useful when you've got multiple owners, but not everybody's in the room. So for example, husband brings the pet in, but the wife didn't come for the consult, so she needs to stay informed. So generating, supplementary documentation or communications is probably the second most common use case of vet notes and AI scribes.
That's great. So my own impression as well also is that, let's say I do a consult, note taker is listening to my consult, generates some initial notes. Now I could then talk to that note taker a little while later to say, here's my current thinking, 1, 2, 3, 4, here are the steps I'm going to take. And then a few hours later, I could say, well, we've done these tests, here are the test results, and the patient is doing X, Y, or Z. At the end of the day, it could actually end up making notes for that same patient throughout the entire day with me not having to do that much typing at all.
Yeah, that's right. You can always extend a recording to
Yeah.
add on additional context that you get throughout the day.
What about vet dictionaries? I know, if you use a non-medical AI tool to interpret anything, any sort of conversation, you put in any kind of medical terminology, it can be a little interesting what gets spat out at the end of it. So how do the note-taking softwares that are used in veterinary clinics and human medical clinics, how do they get around that?
Well, the reason that this challenge occurs is sort of twofold. Firstly, the accuracy of transcription is generally correlated to how frequently does that word show up in the training data of the speech to text algorithm. Now, for veterinary words, that tends to be not as common, so the algorithms just aren't as good at spelling it correctly. And this is even more so with proper nouns or drug names, because a lot of these are actually brand names that are technically just made up. So yes, it is challenging to correctly transcribe veterinary terms. How we do it here at VetNotes is through a range of different methods, but generally centers around using veterinary specific voice to text models that already have a really deep understanding of the most common several thousand veterinary words, and then in-house internally, we've spent thousands of veterinary hours manually correcting words so that they're spelled correctly.
Great. That sounds good. There's no small task because the veterinary dictionary that you can get or used to be able to get was already over 1,000 pages long with all of the definitions and the spelling and everything in there. So I'm curious, where do you see AI going in veterinary medicine? We mentioned right at the start how it's used in radiology and ultrasound. It's also used in clinical pathology. It's used obviously clearly in note taking. Where's this all going to go?
Look, I think there's a couple of different avenues that will progress in the future. You've got some paths that are more, I guess, clinical. So you can imagine a chatbot that is more of like a thought partner that you can discuss ideas with and help come to conclusions. There's also a more general administrative angle where you can think of any manual computer-based tasks that a vet or a practice manager or nurse does in the clinic. Could that reasonably be done with AI? Assuming that the AI knows how to use the computer and is just as knowledgeable on the systems and processes as somebody in the clinic. So a couple of examples of this: if you're in a consult and you mention a cow give this Pentasan injection, then the AI can automatically add that to the bill for you. If you say, okay, we'll give you an estimate for XYZ surgery, it'll automatically draft that estimate for you. So I think in the next step is just taking the information that's recorded in the consult and sending that to more places. Like at the moment, we send it to the clinical record. Next, we'll send the vital signs to those relevant areas. We'll send quotes, invoices, etc. I think the layer on top of that is more quote unquote agentic, which means this is not just when the AI is entering data into the system. It's a little bit smarter. It has some reasoning, so it can actually take actions on your behalf. For example, if you say in consult, we'll give you a reminder in a week to come back for that. Then it will automatically add that item into the system if it's not already there.
Great. And what about AI reception? I know that some companies are using AI, telecommunications companies being one of them. You've phone up a number and you talk to somebody who sounds like a human, but they're not a human. It's an AI, and you can have a conversation with them. Is that something that you think that's going to make it into the veterinary space?
I think it will. At the moment, I would say that the technology is further along than we are socially to how that feels. Like
Mhm.
in your own experience, how was it when you knew you were chatting to an AI?
Yeah, look, it's certainly better than the old machines where you press one for this and press two for that. Like it is much more personable. Yeah, look, I think it's probably improving. I think the AI human interface interaction is getting more and more realistic as time goes on. So whether or not that would work in the sphere that I work in, which is emergency medicine, I'm not sure it would work all that well. But for a general practice clinic, it may work for an initial filter for taking bookings, those kinds of things as well. What are your thoughts?
Well, we're seeing two trends, which I think will lead to this being quite common in the future. The first is the technological trend of how proficient is an AI phone receptionist. So 3 years ago, it did not exist whatsoever. Now, today, the best AI receptionists, you can't tell it's human, or you can, but only just, or maybe 50% of people that spoke to it would realize. So if we, project that trend forwards, at some point it will be absolutely indistinguishable from a human. And in that instance, there are actually a lot of benefits to it being AI. Notably, it knows all of the practices, information, and policies perfectly. It can pick up the phone immediately at any hour of the day. So that's the first trend. The technology is improving and at some point will be indistinguishable from speaking to a real person. I think the second trend, which is also heading in the direction of this will be common in the future, is just socially, how do we feel towards it? I mean, at the moment, if the average person picks up the phone and speaks to a very, an AI bot from 5 years ago that says like press one for this, press two for this, that's not a great experience. And socially, we don't like that. However, as AI becomes, much more mainstream, as we've seen over the last 3 years, I think people's receptiveness to it will massively increase over the next few years, such that, in an ideal world, in 1 to 5 years' time, you can call your vet, they can pick up immediately, they can book you in, they know all of the practices, procedures, prices, etc., like the back of their hand. So it actually is genuinely a really great experience to speak with them.
That's awesome. It's very, very exciting to see where this is all going. I want to take this opportunity, Mitch, to thank you tremendously for spending time with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you and expanding my mind a little bit on where AI is going to take us. And I wish you all the best with Vet Notes.
Thanks very much, Phil. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Vet Synapse. If you like this episode, please subscribe to the podcast and share it with your friends and colleagues. Make sure to visit our website at veteducation.com.au for more great content and to experience the latest online race-approved veterinary continuing education.